Congress here at the Aquava Hall in St. Louis. I love saying that. I love saying that. Uhuru! So, did everybody have a great lunch? Lunch was good. If people can find it to their seat, and what we want to do, because it's a security issue, if we could keep this hall clear, and then if you next for the bathroom, you just watch the door and you get up and go next, okay? And we only just made the bathrooms unisex. Whichever one's opened up first, go in there. Non-gender sexual conforming bathrooms, okay? So, Master, can you have a seat? Thank you. And everybody in the back, if you could just find your way to your seat, because you do not want to miss this next panel discussion. It's going to be, this is one that I want everybody to pull out their pen and paper and write, because we are practical revolutionaries, and this is going to equip you to wherever you go to be revolutionary evangelists, taking African internationalists out wherever we are, building and making life on life, pouring African internationalists everywhere, and that's what we are called to do. And so this next panel discussion is going to be one that is going to do just that. So everybody, you do not want to go to the bathroom, your water run, or outside. You want to be sitting here listening to this next panel. So it's my honor to bring back to the stage our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and as well, that's going to be joining him. And joining him, our leadership, Secretary General Luwezi is going to be joining this panel as well. Let's give her a round of applause. So this panel is titled, How African Internationalists Answer the Question of the Nation, the African Nation. And this is so important. This is not some, this is a very important conversation, because when you are a mass organizer and you're going out into the community, the question of us being a nation and African internationalism and how to be able to put it out in lane, you know, be able to put this out to the masses is so important to our development. So we have to go and multiply ourselves over and over and over again. And it's not winning people to your but winning people to African internationalists, because that is the theory that helps deepen our understanding of how we're going to get free. So this panel discussion is so important. I know I'm going to be taking notes. So, Uhuru.
Uhuru. I want to initiate this discussion from this place here. The question of the nation is a critical question that is not well understood by most people. And it is an extraordinarily important question for African people. For a people where millions and millions of us, there is no meaningful count that can be given. Millions of us were first snatched up from Africa and dispersed around the world. It's an extraordinary thing that what people refer to with that, the slave trade, is that Africans were kidnapped, thrust on ships, and those of us survived that ordeal. And the ordeal was more than just the trip from Africa to the Americas. The ordeal was the trip often from the interior of Africa, where we were kidnapped, and then to these slave camps, or sometimes castles, as they were referred to. And the numbers of people who died in the process of walking by foot across the continent to these places where we were held, sometimes for weeks. And then there was the loss of life that was associated with that. Women, who were raped by captors from the place where we were captured to these holding pens, these dungeons that they stuck us in on the coast of Africa. Women who were raped while held in these dungeons and what have you. The numbers of Africans who were stuck in special cells without air, without light, those whose resistance they found they were unable to conquer, were simply suffocated to death, stuck in rooms, hundreds at a time, no air, no light, nothing. Those who lived were stuck in dungeons where there were no toilets and only small slits that allowed air and light to come in, where we slept on floors in our own fecal matter, where women stuck in separate holding pens. We're talking about a country that separates children from their mothers as if it's something new. But the women who, it was just a real horrible kind of thing, and then separated around the world, forced to speak the language of our oppressors, and sometimes killed when we refused to do that or otherwise brutalized, forced to accept the names of our oppressors. And we talk about how Africans, after the initial raids on Africa that brought Africans out of Africa through these castles and the so-called door of no return, and leaving Africa, they disappeared. We disappeared. So we left as Africans. We ended up being any number of things. Haitians, Jamaicans, Guadeloupans, any number of things. So to try to find Africans after slavery was almost impossible. It was as if we didn't exist anymore. Then on the continent of Africa itself, these artificial borders were created to facilitate the theft of our wealth and our resources on the continent. And we became named for them. We became named for shrimp, like in Cameroon, the so-called Cameroonians. We became named for whatever white power wanted to name us. And then in many places, we became named for our oppressors, just like they might name a cow or a dog or something like that. That is what happened to African people. Sometimes with names branded with hot irons. This is what happened to us. So this national question is really important. The other thing about that is when they locked Africa into these separate entities that they created, these borders, they also had attacked the economies that existed in Africa. And they made it impossible for economies to grow out of these tightly defined entities that they created. And the economy then, and these entities were not to feed, clothe, and house Africans, but was to create wealth for somebody else, wealth that was going to be leaving Africa and taking care of Europeans. So what it meant was, because language itself is a function of production, it meant that even the development of a common language in African people was frustrated, stalled for the moment. And in fact, there are Africans on the continent of Africa, there are many more Africans in so-called French Africa, the Africa that was controlled by French, that speak French than any other language indigenous to Africa, because production was organized around French requirements and everything else that was there. And since we must talk about this question of the nation, one thing that has been, it speaks to us about identity. And this is not a question, a discussion that we're entering into to cure some abstract intellectual itch. It is extremely important to us in practical ways. To begin this discussion, what I would like to do is ask for Sister Christine to come forward. Sister Christine lives there, well, in Kansas, right? Kansas City, Missouri. So can you just say who you are? Can you say who you are?
My name is Christine Wilson. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a member of the African People's Socialist Party, close to 2 years now. And my direct leadership is President Columbai Antoinette.
Oh, hold on. Don't go. Now, you know, Christine is not indigenous to Africa. If her relatives come looking for her and they look for Christine Wilson, they will never find her. If they just go through a phone directory, if such a thing exists anymore, looking for her, they will never find her, because Christine Wilson is not a name that's indigenous to Africa. And part of the decolonizing process is casting off the identity of the colonizer. Yes. It is an important break. And African women understand this instinctively. That's why you see so many Africans not named Judy, Mary, Susie, Q, or anything like that. African women create names. And what's really interesting about them, you can tell the name of an African in this country, you can tell that's an African person. And you can tell it because the women have decided that they were not going to name their children for the slave master anymore, right? And so what we want to do here today is, first of all, recognize the significance of the name in terms of our identity as a people. Nobody should be able to mistake my name for that of a European. Nobody should be able to do that. When I hear Wachowski, I do not expect to see a Mexican. And unfortunately, Spanish is also one of those colonizers' names as well. So in African society, naming is so extremely important. The names mean something. And Comrade Nana Yaw, right here. And Yaw is a name that means Thursday. And is a child born on a Thursday. If I were named in that fashion, my name would also be Yaw. We name people, and sometimes for grandparents and things like that, so that person should continue to live forever in the name of this child. we name people because of when they were born. For example, I have a grandson that I named Mashombe, and because Mashombe means born prematurely or early born. Names mean something. Names express the aspirations also that we have for our children, what we expect and want them to be. And names are something that the village or the community also participate in. And Comrade Christine Wilson is someone who assumed the responsibility for organizing the Midwest region for this Congress, the Midwest Regional Committee. And before that, she had established herself as the membership coordinator for the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And she was tired of being Christine. Not only because Comrade Kalambayi was always going to mess up her name, Comrade Kalambayi would mess up Joe. So we know her, and many of us in this community, in this family, in this village know her. And she asked to have another name. And Comrade Brother Luwezi was called on to participate in helping to choose a name for this incredible sister. And we said that she's brilliant in everything that she does. It expresses brilliance. And Comrade Luwezi says then her name should be Shuparu. Shupavu. Because in Kiswahili, Shupavu means brilliant. He said, her name should be Kirima. Because in Kikuyu, in East Africa, Kenya, it means a hill, but it's more than just that. Kirima was also the last name of Muthoni Kirima, who was the only Mau Mau female field marshal. Who had a reputation of being a good shot. So, how do you feel about that name? How do you feel about that name? We know. We believe it's a fitting name, right? Yes. It says what we think of her. It also says what we expect of her. Yes. That's the name. Yes. And how do you feel about that name? 99. So we have to organize a rebirth certificate for this comrade who henceforth should be known as Shupavu Kirima. Kirima. Yeah. So Kupavu. Shipavu. 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 SHU, Shupavu. Shupavu. Okay.
She got a nickname already. She said she.
Shupavu. So, with that, Sister Shupavu, is there anything that you wanted to say?
I don't want to cry anymore. I told myself I wasn't going to cry this time. I cried at the conference.
Go ahead. Yes, joy, tear joy. Tears of joy.
I'm not going to cry anymore. I unite with this name. I unite with the responsibility that it brings. And I won't let you all down.
African history is thousands of years old. Our captivity, the 600 years or so that came as a consequence of the Atlantic slave trade, the 1,500 years that the trans-Saharan slave trade consisted of, is like the blink of an eye in African history. Africa had created magnificent civilizations before Europe mastered fire. This is a literal truth. Before Europeans mastered fire, Africans had created magnificent civilizations. Yet, we only find this thing that we speak of called the nation emerging in the 19th century that was characterized as the era of nation building. And it is because the creation of what is now referred to as the nation was a phenomenon that occurred in Europe, as Europe had to solve some particular contradictions and problems there in order to move forward. I should tell you a little bit of why we're talking about the nation. And again, it is not some purely abstract ideological discussion purely. I want to go to the introduction, the beginning of this discussion as it occurred in the political report to the 6th Congress first. We say that we open it up talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski. And here you will find the objective material basis of why this discussion is important. More important than what many of the black nationalists and cultural nationalists are able to imagine. I'm on page 218. In the 10th chapter, it is a chapter that came from the political report to the 6th Congress that we reproduce here. And it begins, imperialist political oracle and Obama advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski is a ruling class observer of the crisis of imperialism. In his book, Second Chance, 3 Presidents and the Crisis of a Superpower, Brzezinski wrote this, not me. This is his characterization of what was happening in the world. Brzezinski makes this observation about the significance of the question of identity today, when imperialism is being challenged to its parasitic foundation by the political intervention of the peoples upon whose oppression this system was founded. We quote Brzezinski, and he says, global systemic instability is likely to be prompted in many parts of the world by challenges to existing state frontiers. In Asia and Africa especially, state borders are often imperial legacies and do not reflect ethnic or linguistic boundaries. These borders are vulnerable to increased pressure as heightened political consciousness leads to more assertive territorial aspirations. They can only think in terms of territorial aspirations. That's how the imperialists think. But there's a deeper point here that we understand. The largely anti-Western character of populist activism has less to do with ideological or religious bias and more with historical experience. Western or European domination is part of the living memory of hundreds of millions of Asians and Africans, and some Latin Americans, though in this case its sharp edge is pointed at the United States. In the vast majority of states, national identity and national emancipation are associated with the end of foreign imperial domination. And he goes on to make this interesting statement. This is true in such large and self-confident states as India or China as it is in Congo or Haiti, which I guess are not large and self-confident entities. But, so this is part of a recognition that here, one of the leading thinking representatives of white power recognizes this crisis. And it is a real crisis. As you can see, a certain fracturing that's happening with the bourgeois, European bourgeois nation around the world. And we quote Patrick Buchanan making similar statements about the nation and national identity in this same chapter. So we say on page, in the bottom of page 220, our discussion of the nation is informed by our inevitable elevation as workers to the role of the ruling class in the transition to a world shorn of classes, borders, nations, and states. To win our liberation, we must know who we are and who our enemies are. Let us begin. Most often, the question of the nation of African nationality is handled in careless, offhanded, and vague ways, making no pretense of ascribing to any particular scientific approach or definition. The common approach among Pan-Africanists of referring to the international African community as African peoples, plural, is an example. More commonly, there is the practice of characterizing Africans forcibly dispersed from the continent as African descendants with the intent of differentiating the national identity of such Africans from those who suffered imperial white domination on the continent itself. But if we were going to define someone as African descendants, we would be talking about damn near everybody in the world. But that's not what it is that we're talking about now. So we say that it is difficult to get a uniform definition of the nation from different scholars or intellectuals. Most claim outright that there is not, and some claim outright that there is not an a priori definition of a nation. I can tell you what it is, they might say. I can't tell you what it is, they might say, but I know it when I see it. What is probably the most influential definition of the nation is one offered by Joseph Stalin. This is because as a leader of the Soviet Union and the international communist movement from 1924 to 1953, Stalin took the question out of the classrooms and into the fray of political movements throughout the world. Stalin applied his interpretation to the real conditions impacting and tormenting millions of people struggling to define their places in the world. written at the end of 1912 or early 1913, Stalin's position later published in pamphlet form defined the nation's key elements, which according to Stalin included a historical, constituted, stable community of people formed on the basis of a common language, territory, economic life, and psychological makeup manifested in a common culture. That's the definition that Stalin came up. That's the definition that most people, many people, I should say, around the world, and especially many people who consider themselves communists or socialists, ascribe to. They say that is what the nation is. So obviously, the situation for Africans does not satisfy Stalin's definition of the nation, whether applied to the artificially created African so-called countries carved out at the imperialist Berlin Conference in 1884 and 85, or to African people forcibly dispersed around the world. Stalin's definition can't work. You heard what I said. His definition said the key elements include a historically constituted, stable community of people formed on the basis of a common language, territory, economic life, and psychological makeup manifested in a common culture. That's Stalin's definition. We can't meet that criteria. An African in St. Louis definitely can't be a part of the same nation as an African in Sudan. We can't meet. We're not on the same land base. We don't speak the same language, etc. So Stalin's definition was interesting. But then we look at this book called The Undivided Past. This was written by David Cannadine. I'm on page 222. And what's really interesting is what it does, how it affects, how it relates to part of what Stalin identified as the nation. And this book by Cannadine, who is no friend of the nation, in fact, the basis he's writing that is to dismiss the whole notion of nations. To begin with, the idea that the belligerents, he's talking about the self-defined European nations involved in the First Imperialist World War. That's what he's talking about here. And he goes on to say, to begin with, the idea that the belligerents of 1914 were unified, homogeneous nations does not survive detailed examination. Consider, for example, the matter of common language, often regarded as essential to any shared sense of national identity. It certainly did not exist in the nation created by the Risorgimento. We have made Italy, Massimo D'Azeglio observed at the time. Now we have to make Italians. We've made Italy, now we have to make Italians. With less than 5% of the population using Italian for everyday purposes, they had a long way to go. In France, almost half the school children engaged with French as a foreign language, speaking another language at home. Dialect and patois were widespread. And in departments bordering other nations, it was often Flemish, Catalan, or German that was spoken. A similar picture could be found in Germany, where in the East, many spoke Polish as their first language, whereas in Alsace and Lorraine, many spoke French. And in Russia, educated people conversed in French, while workers and peasants used a wide variety of Slavic languages and dialects. In Austria-Hungary, the array of different tongues was even more varied, including German, Czech, Italian, Hungarian, Polish, Croatian, and Greek. And many of the Habsburg emperor's subjects were multilingual, speaking one language at school or at work, and another at home, insofar as a common tongue could be considered as essential criterion. None of the major powers that went to war in 1914 qualified as a nation. I just wanted to go through that because how we are attacked on the question of our identity, talk like these things that they call nations were etched in some kind of stone, that this is in the Bible, that there's the French, there's this and that, and even since people in this room have been alive, what have been considered nations, no longer, some of what have been considered nations don't even exist anymore. So I want to go to page 223. And this is important under slavery, colonialism, and the basis of the European nation. One of the most discussed questions concerning the nation, one of the least discussed questions concerning the nation is the basis for its existence in history. How is it that the world is perceived as a place where for thousands of years there was no such thing as the nation, only to have it suddenly emerge in Europe, dominating the 19th century, often referred to as the era of nation building? And I want to go over to page 124. 224, I'm sorry, 224. And I want to quote on the bottom of the page a man whose name is Hosea Jaffe, who wrote a book called The History of Africa. And we quote on the bottom of the page, the 15th century then saw the multiplication of the primary accumulation of European capital, primary primitive accumulation, if you will. And Africa played the most important part in the process as the principal arena of European colonialism, the very genesis and foundation of the capitalist system. From the turn of the 16th century, the Americas and Asia were added to this foundation. And out of this totality arose capitalism and modern Europe itself. Before capitalist colonialism, there was no Europe, only a collection of feudal, mercantile, and tribal towns, farms, villages, discrete states and kingdoms vying and warring with each other, just as in Africa, but on a different property basis, that of private property in the land. Europe was neither a concept nor a reality, at most a vague idea that Arabs, but not Europeans, had long ago of someplace northwest of Greece. As long as Europe remained isolated from the world, there was no Europe. When it became connected with and dependent on first Africa, then the Americas, and finally Asia, it began to become a reality and an idea. Only when Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italians, Dutch, English, Germans, Danish, and Swedish confronted and clashed with Africa, America, and Asia did the need arise for them to consider themselves as a set, a whole, different from, hostile to, and eventually superior to Africans, Americans, meaning indigenous people, and Asians. Colonialism gave them a common interest. It gave them a common identity. It is the thing that collectivized this sense of sameness that existed, that now exists among white people. So I want to just move quickly because I know I'm probably already out of time or close to it. Oh, okay. So I want to then move forward and look at the question of African nation. And I want to say that when we talk about you hear us say the European nation. It is something that in reality is recognized, though it's dismissed often, for its practical implications. For example, even now you will hear a demonstration or politic that regular news pundits on TV will refer to as what Malcolm X used to call it, white nationalism. You ever heard that before? This white nationalist group, white nationalism. Well, whiteness and Europe goes together. It's European nationalism that we're looking at. It's a common identity that came into existence as a part of the creation, development of a common economy that was organized around slavery and colonialism. This is the forging thing. So you have a sense of sameness among white people. The French, the Belgians, the Scots, the British, all of them have this sense of sameness. They might not like each other that much. They didn't before. When we started talking about, we talked about how before there were these vying tribes and kingdoms fighting with each other. But what gave them a common interest, what hooked them up together and gave them a sense of sameness was the slave trade, trading in black people and colonialism. This distinguished now this group of people from the rest of humanity. And it's not just conceptually. The other thing that has transpired is that a whole economy, their identity now rests upon an economy, a predatory economy that sucks the blood and resources from everybody else. And so you have a sense of sameness among Europeans as it relates to the rest of us. We're not saying they all like each other, but as it relates to the rest of us, this is the thing that creates this common identity. And you may have a problem with that, but the truth of the matter is this. A nation is defined not only by what it is, but it's defined by what it's not. You can't define a nation by itself. It can only be a nation as it relates to other people, other nations, other countries, other peoples. You can't be black if that's the only thing that's there. You can't be black. I'm sorry. You say black because it distinguishes you from anything else, anybody else. That's what black requires. There can't be an up. You can't just have an up. There has to be a down. This is what we call the unity of opposites. This is dialectics that we are talking about. And so we have this group now that becomes defined in relationship with others. When it was a small, tiny groups that we were looking at, they defined themselves in relationship to each other. Now that this group has achieved a common interest in slavery and colonialism, and whose welfare depends on this slavery and colonialism, this economy, now you have a group identity that encompasses all of them. That's the European nation that we're talking about. That's not what Stalin said. So I want to just read briefly. So on page 244, we say, I'm going to talk about the nation and some things about what makes the nation. And all of this, the only reason that we have to have this discussion is because the U.S. and the other imperialist governments of the world crushed the Garvey movement. 244. 44? Yes. We wouldn't be having this discussion if the U.S. and other imperialist governments hadn't crushed the Garvey movement. Because the Garvey movement was a practical manifestation of the sense of sameness of black people around the world. Not just in Africa, in Europe, and what we call in Australia, India, all of us. This was a practical manifestation. The proof is in the pudding, as it said, and not in anything that was written by Stalin or anybody else. You had millions of Africans who responded to the call by Garvey. Africa, for Africans, those at home, meaning on the continent, and abroad, meaning every place else we were located. So on 244, under the subhead, the African nation and commonality of culture, we say the African nation is real. It is distinguished by a number of elements, both objective and subjective. Clearly, there is a sense of sameness, something that Europeans and Negro scholars often pretend does not exist, but which nevertheless exposes itself to public view every time Africans come to harm from or achieve victory over imperialist white power. There was a time when the name Jack Johnson was known by black people all over the world. Jack Johnson, the heavyweight champion of the world, who Miles Davis once parodied in a piece that he did. My name is Jack Johnson. I'm the heavyweight champion of the world. I'm a black man, and they won't let me forget it. My name is Jack Johnson. I'm the heavyweight champion of the world. I'm a black man, and I won't let them forget it. Yes. So people knew Marcus Garvey and Jack Johnson all over the continent of Africa. They had that identity. Comrade Luwezi was with me in Berlin, Germany. I think we were in Berlin, where we were having a conference. And this is the time where Katrina had recently happened. And Africans were seen hanging from the rooftops after that flood, and how the colonial powers had treated us, and how the military had been sent in to make sure that we not get out of that and do any kind of harm to the colonial population. And the African came up and said that we have to create a black Ankh. Like they got the Red Cross that looks out for them anytime they're in trouble. We have to create a black Ankh. This African, he was living in Germany. He was from the Caribbean, but recognized Africans in Louisiana as part of the same group. We're one people. And when we're in trouble, when we see Africans in trouble someplace, we experience that. We experience that, even if it's shamefully so. Michael Jackson knew that he was an African. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent so much money trying to look like he wasn't. You don't do that. If you know you're not that, you don't have to do that. It's the fact that he did know he was an African that made it necessary for him to mutilate himself in that fashion so that he would look like something else. So there's a sense of sameness. And then I just want to say quickly, I want to move quickly because we have examples of some things that are really important. People have really made some important contributions to this discussion. So we can say, therefore, on page 249, that the African nation is one born of its historical ties to the African national homeland. Let's go back to 248. Who is an African? On the bottom of the page. We can see our commonality in Africa, but as he pointed out earlier, no nation is defined solely in relationship to itself. To say that the nation is one thing is to say that it is not another. Dark skin is a product of equatorial Africa, the land of black people. Black people among ourselves would be incapable of defining ourselves as such. It is through our relationship with so-called white people and the dialectic of the oppressor nation and the oppressed nation that Africans became black. We can say, therefore, that the African nation is one born of its historical ties to its African national homeland, with a core sense of sameness that includes a common culture, history, and physiognomy. And it does have a common culture, by the way. You need Comrade Luwezi to give you the class on that so that you can see Africa all around the world in African people. And an intriguing thing that I continue to run into everywhere where I see not only I see a cultural phenomenon that I might see in Ghana or in West Africa, and then I see the same thing in Ethiopia and East Africa. And various, I've even seen it coming out of India, by the way. So we can say, therefore, that the African nation is one born of its historical ties to its African national homeland with a core sense of sameness that includes a common culture, history, and physiognomy. Still, to arrive at a full definition of the African nation, we must say more than this. The African nation is informed by historical necessity, determined by our conditions of existence at this very moment, hundreds of years subsequent to our defining conflict with the European predatory nation. Europe's parasitic attachment to Africa and Africans shapes and determines both its successful existence and our national coherence. Do you see what we said? That Europe's parasitic attachment to Africa and Africans shape and determines Europe's successful existence and our national incoherence. That's how Europe's successful existence came about as a part of the process of turning this sister into Christine Wilson, and turning my daddy into Joe Waller. This is the foundation that European national success came about, and our national incoherence. I'm now Joe. Where the hell does Joe come from? I tell you, I've heard it said before, eyes coming, for my head is bending low. I hears the angels' voices calling, oh, Black Joe. That's where Joe came from, the plantation that was created by our oppressors. A critical feature of our conditions of existence as a people is the imperialist near total control of the economic life of African people wherever we are located in the world. Neither Africa the land nor Africans the people, both fundamental components of the productive forces, have been accessible to Africa for the production and reproduction of real life for Africa and Africans. Hence, Africa has created staggering wealth for imperialism that has benefited the entire European nation, both the ruling class, middle class, workers, and others at our expense. Everything they have was stolen from our labor, resources, and knowledge. We have a historical mandate to take back what is ours and fulfill our destiny as a united, independent, self-governing nation in control of our own continent and future. History requires the consolidation of the African nation as a fundamental part of the struggle against imperialism. As the European nation has achieved its definition and success at fracturing, undermining the African nation, the consolidation of the African nation will result in the dissolution of what we now know as the European nation. And which is why you see evidence of the crisis of the oppressed peoples around the world. You see the peoples around the world creating a crisis of imperialism that is making it very difficult for what has been characterized as European national entities to hold together, even today. So I've spoken too much. There's much stuff. You must read this because Comrade Luwezi has stuff to say. But let me say this, that one of the fundamental contradictions we have as Africans is this national question. That's why Africans are able to kill each other in Kenya, because I'm Kikuyu versus Luo, I'm some other thing versus this, etc., because what should be our primary identity as African is not something that's recognized or respected. See, every nation has more than one identity. Every people has more than one identity. We are Africans, but we may be Muslims, we may be Christians, we may be some of the traditional original religions of Africa. We may have all of these other features as a part of the nation, but our primary identity, African. And as that is the primary identity, we can't be pushed around and pulled out of place by I'm being a Haitian over here, a Jamaican over here, or some other ethnic on the continent of Africa. We get misused, mistreated, tricked. There are Negroes right now in military uniform, combat gear, killing black people on the continent of Africa that came from this country. One of them, Lamar. Y'all remember Lamar? LaDavid Johnson, who died in Niger. So this question of national identity is one that's extremely important for us. And you can't be an African and an American at the same time. Don't let somebody stick that suffocating, destructive hyphen on you. Some kind of hybrid person, African American. And you're the only one. Anyway, I'm turning it over to Comrade Luwezi. Hold on.
Comrade. Yeah, first of all, I just want to recognize the chairman, Omali, Yeshitela leadership. He's the one who has opened up the whole question for African nation. And yeah, as you have realized, it has gone back to the definition that all of us used. That was Stalin's definition. And it has made that redundant because the question of the nation is not something you wish to discuss because you read some books. It is a historical necessity. It is necessary. Remember, when I'm sure you came across this somewhere in a burning sphere, the question was asked for Africans to be free. Is it a possibility? Should we think of it as a possibility or as a necessity? Well, what was the answer? Necessity. So the question of the nation is not a question of a possibility. It is a necessity. If we do not have an African nation that is united, liberated and united, we will continue to be colonized. Because colonization is basically a denial of our right to have a nation of our own, so we can have freedom on our own terms. So when we look at the question of the nation, we think of Africa as our homeland. Africa is the homeland for all black people. No African, no black person on the earth should be a foreigner in Africa. Right. Not a single one. Think about it. You have settlers, white settlers in South Africa. Nobody's going after them to ask, to request their visa. Nobody. There is no white person in jail, not just in South Africa, anywhere in Africa on the immigration issues. Not a single one. We have Indians in Africa. They have no problem for immigration. We have Arabs in Africa. They have no problem for immigration. But I tell you, there are Africans in jail in Africa today because they don't have the so-called right papers. From North Africa to South Africa, there are Africans in jail. And you Africans in so-called Americas, you want to go home to Africa, you need a bloody visa. It doesn't make sense. Because when Africans here left Africa against their will, now they want to go to Africa on their own will. Some Negroes, some Obama's relative over there in power, or Obama's class relative, request a visa because they want to make money from you. And that's not acceptable at all. And we know all the nationalities we have, as the chairman often say, they are false nationalities. And we know why they are false nationalities. For the simple reason that the world economy we refer to as parasitical economy is illegitimate economy. Economy born out of our enslavement cannot be legitimate economy. An economy that requires transfer of African material. Your birthright can't be a legitimate economy, and we get our nationalities from those economies created at our expense. If I'm from Ghana, they used to call it Gold Coast. Yeah. You guess what the nationality was? Gold, what, goldish or gold castle? I'm not sure what it used to be, some gold stuff. But it has nothing to do with us. That's what the British, used to get their gold. And of course, you have Ivory Coast, ivory, elephant. That's what they got the elephant tusks. And this is the nationality people have. And people fight and die for it. In Ivory Coast, there was a war where the African petty bourgeoisie requested that every African from that part to show they are really true Ivory Coast people. So if you can't show your ivority, as they call it, you're not from there. You might lose your life and things like that. And in every single African country, you have something like that going on. It could be Zambia, it could be Congo, it could be anywhere. There's something going on against the Africans who came from the other side. Something like that. So we say no African can be a foreigner in Africa itself. And most of us are also familiar with what the bourgeoisie project about Africa. Always, they project tribes. They don't project what we call nation, like a large group of people with a sense of sameness. They also project something, a group of people always being on each other's throats, So when you see those images, or when you hear of, in fact, the bourgeoisie likes to explain every single war in Africa on the tribal lines. That's how they do it. I can tell you there is no conflict in Africa that is based on the so-called tribes. All the conflicts in Africa, all of them are imperialist conflicts. All of them. And when it's being expressed as tribalism, basically, you're looking at African opportunists who is in defense of imperialism. Because since the so-called African independence, no African can come in front of the people and say, I'm a tribalist. They can't say that. Yeah. But what they do, they accuse the neighbors, the other group, to say they're taking everything from us, or something, like that. But in reality, it's a defense of imperialism. It's a defense of white power in a black face. And a good example of it, it could be what we saw in Rwanda. You remember Rwanda? 94. There was a bloodshed. 1 million Africans died just like that. And it was a defense of imperialism, because it was also the Frenchman, the chairman talks about it when he say France and the United States at one point in Africa, they were fighting each other. So the Rwandan war was basically United States fighting against France. United States supporting what we call the Rwandan Patriotic Front of Kagame, and the French supporting the government of Habyarimana. So each side being armed by outsider. And they went to war, and the faction supported by the United States government won. And today, Rwanda is the military basis of the United States. Is a military outpost of the United States of America. And wherever the United States goes to war in Africa, the Rwandan army is always there as a proxy army of Rwanda. So it has nothing to do with the so-called tribes, because those African opportunists, they use the ethnicity, they use Tutsi ethnicity to say Tutsi being oppressed. No, the Tutsi workers are being oppressed. The Tutsi peasants are being oppressed, just as the Hutu workers and peasants being oppressed. But the petty bourgeoisie of both sides, they've been selling Africa all the time. So these two groups, they don't say it like that. They might talk, they might project themselves as sometimes as Rwandan nationalists. They ain't. What they are, they have committed national suicide. Yeah. They're not fighting for an African nation. They are in war against Africa.
Yeah.
That's what you saw. They are in war against Africa. Yeah. When there was a war in Nigeria, so-called Biafra war, what you saw, the French supported the Biafra side, and the US and the English supporting the other side. That was war against Africa, because the victims are the African workers and peasants. It's the unity of Africans being attacked. It's a frontal attack, because it takes years to get the two groups to come together again. It takes really long time. So the African petty bourgeoisie cannot fight for the liberation of the African nation. What they fought for, remember the struggle for independence of Africa in the 60s? They fought for their right to be treated fairly within colonialism, because under direct colonialism, we had what they call in South Africa apartheid. They didn't call apartheid in the economy. It was the same thing. From 5 p.m., no Africans in a white part of the city. Things like that. No, Africans allowed in the cinema, stuff like that. So they fought for the right to be equals. But since the main trend, as often Chairman said, around the world was the struggle for revolution. So the African petty bourgeoisie used that in most of part of Africa, and they present their struggle as a struggle for national liberation. But they didn't fight for national liberation. They used the struggle to negotiate their part, their share, and those they have done. And today, they celebrate so-called African independence every year. And the people are confused, because if we fought for this, it's not worth fighting for. And the masses have come to the conclusion that direct colonialism was better. That's the conclusion the masses have come to in most parts of Africa. For the simple reason the African petty bourgeoisie did not fight for real national liberation. And the national liberation struggle has to be fought by the African working class. It's the only social class which cannot have a national existence as a free people having access to its own economy, its own industries, short of a total defeat of white power. The African working class cannot compromise with white power, but the African... And up to now, I think we are correct to say African petty bourgeoisie has failed to commit class suicide. And I think they will be able to do it only under the leadership of the African working class. It's the rise of the African working class will make it possible for sectors of African petty bourgeoisie to commit class suicide. So if there is no African People's Socialist Party leading the struggle in all those places, it won't happen at all. So, and the other things we want to say, Chairman talks about the sense of sameness. You know the borders were imposed on us. The borders in Africa are an exportation of Europe. We didn't have borders. And we didn't have a culture of seeking visa to go and visit your relative or move about Africa. It didn't exist. And Africans always knew that we were the same people, because the sense of hospitality was the same everywhere in Africa. Yeah. You come from West Africa, when you reach Central Africa, they will welcome you, and you will have even more rights than the local. Yeah. They have to make sure you have access to everything. Yeah. If you're a man, you're going to stay for long, they might even ask you to marry somebody there while you're there. And if you check our history, our names, you will see that our sense of sameness is something very profound. I'll just take a few examples. I'll take an example for Ngoma. You know, Ngoma is the name of Elikia Ngoma. Ngoma, Comrade Hussein can tell you, you get Ngoma from Senegal. Sometimes Ngoma loses the A. It becomes Ngom, by the same name. Then that Ngoma travels down every single country. It's in the Cameroon, it's in the Ivory Coast, it's plenty of Ngoma in the Congo, it's in Angola, it's in South Africa, in Zimbabwe. Ngoma is everywhere. You think it's just coincidence? It's not coincidence. It's the historical reality. It's the same people have been moving from one place to the next. Because Africa is our homeland. You can go east, south, north. It's up to you. That's what we did. And it's not the only name. We can take Mbo. Hussein knows about Mbo. There are plenty of Mbo in Senegal. Yeah. There are plenty of Mbo in the Congo. Can you see the distance? 2,000 miles at least between the two, but plenty of Mbos. You go to Samba, you're familiar with the name Samba. Samba from Brazil. Go in the Senegal, and in every classroom there's a Samba in the classroom, right? Come to Congo, in every classroom there's a Samba. And sometimes it changes. Instead of being just Samba, it becomes Ma Samba, or it becomes Ka Samba, or Chi Samba, but it's the same name. Are you going to get the name? I take Londa. My daughter's name is Kilonda. You've got Kalonda, Chilonda, Mulonda, Bilonda. It depends on where you go, but it's the same name, same meaning. You get it from West Africa down to South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, you get the same names. I was in South Africa not a long time ago. In September, the chairman of the party in South Africa, Tafari, he said, where is he from? There are people known as the vendor. The vendors say they are from Congo. Now, if you come to Congo, we got a lot of Africans from, different parts. You speak to Pende, they say they are from Angola. And that's how Africa is. Go back to Senegal, the white man calls us tribes. How can you call people in Senegal tribes? What do you mean by that? Because the Wolof is clear. They are made of people from Congo in the north. The names from people from Congo in the north, like Mbo Kande, that's what you get in Senegal. I talked about Masamba, these people from Congo in the south. So people from the north in the Congo and the south in the Congo, you get both in Senegal, so-called Wolof. People from Ivory Coast, the Lo, they are there in Senegal. People from Sudan, the Nyang, the Deng, plenty in the Wolof. So how can you call Wolof a tribe? Of course, they have no definition. They just mean colonized people, something like that. So the question of who we are is profound. We are African people. We are African internationalists. Yes. The chairman read one passage where he said, now we have created Italian. Yeah. Now we have Italian language. Now we have created Italians. Now we have created African internationalists. What should we do now? We have to create Africans. I'm not just saying that in terms of an ideological point of view. I'm saying that because with the emergence of nations in a context of a world economy created out of colonialism, we are nations with power. The French became French with the emergence of capitalism as white power. You could not get the French as white power and having French nation at the same time. It's the white power that created the French nation. It's white power that created so-called British nation. There was no British nation before. You had English and Scottish, even the English split between different, what do you call them, dukes, people like that. Britain became Britain less than 350 years ago. Spain was never united. You go to the Basque, the Catalonians, the Castilians. It's slavery, as it's saying in the report, that gave them common purpose, that made them Spanish. It's white power that made them like that. And white power was born in its attacks on Africa. So all these nationalities were born in the attacks against Africa. All these nationalities required Africa to be colonized forever, for them to be French, Americans, all these nationalities. Yeah. So the struggle for black people to achieve a free nation is the struggle also to end the domination of Africa by colonial Europe, which means it's also the end of these nationalities. That's what we said the economy, what we call the world economy, capitalist passage world economy, is an illegitimate world economy. It was created at the expense of indigenous people in Americas, at the expense of Africans in Africa and around the world and so on. So the struggle for African nationality is really a struggle for genuine nationality for everybody. you can't have a nationality based on colonialism. It's a false nationality. And that's really critical. That's why the struggle for black power requires you to be Africans. Because every black person, every black community in the world, that might see as a local struggle. It could be in Montserrat, it could be in Jamaica, it could be anywhere. But every struggle can only be concluded successfully if that struggle achieves black power. But how can you achieve black power in a population of 10,000? How can you achieve power in a Togo, an economy of less than 3 million people, or in Namibia? You just can't. You can only achieve black power if you involve in a struggle for what? For the African nation. So it is a historical necessity. It's not a choice, it's historical necessity. That's why those of us, we understand who we are as African internationalists, evangelists. We have to reach out to everybody, mobilize everybody. You have to become an Africans because we have created already African internationalism. Now we're creating the African nation. Nobody's going to give us the African nation. It's going to be born, as the chairman said in his report, it's going to be born as a revolutionary project. It's going to be born as a revolutionary nation. And you know, the French, the white ruling class is in crisis. Yes, in a crisis. No white leader can come on a mic and brag about being certain about the future. Wow. These kind of things they used to do, you know, years ago, centuries ago, they can't. And every single one who claims to be a president, within what, less than a year, it proves himself or herself to be incompetent. And they're losing, you know, credibility at such speed. It's incredible. The leader of Britain is discredited. The leader of France, Macron, has been in power less than 2 years, is discredited. Macron, the leader of Germany, she used to be seen as Merkel. You know, she used to have a lot of authority and all kind of stuff. It has just no authority now. You can't find a white leader with authority as such. And the traditional ruling class are in crisis. And there's a preacher from Britain. He said, there is nothing to hold us together anymore. He said that. Yeah. That's why when we say we are winning, we are winning. So I'm going to just say a few things about the African petty bourgeoisie again, then I will stop here. You know, the question of a nation is a class struggle. It's a vicious class struggle. I hear African petty bourgeoisie. I hate anyone who says they are pacifist. Yeah, yeah. And they are African politicians. I hate them. How can you be a pacifist when you want to be a president of a neo-colonial Africa? Even if it wasn't the colonial Africa, it was in the United States. When you're going to be the head of a state, you're going to be the one who decide who to shoot, who to kill every day. How can you come public and say you're a pacifist? How can Mandela say he's a pacifist? Well, it's going to be a head of a state. State is there to repress, right? Yes. You're going to repress somebody. Yes. How can you repress peacefully? Yes. You just can't. And I hate those ones. I hear them every day in Africa when they go to elections. So I just want to say the African petty bourgeoisie is vicious. Yes. When I say they are vicious, yes, I'm not saying somebody who kills, who shoot on 2 or 3 people, youngsters who are confused because of the war against the African community. Yeah. Then you're going to put them on a newspaper in front of newspapers as a criminal. Put Kabila on the front page. Put Museveni in the front page. Put Kagame in the front page. Because Each of these 3 presidents, each of them has killed at least 1 million Africans. Yeah. Each one of them. But they are allowed, just 2 weeks ago, they were at the UN here in the United States, New York. They all gave speeches there. Nobody arrested them. Yeah. And they kill without mercy. I haven't got the permission from the Central Committee for me to begin to share the images of atrocities in Africa that we have access to. Because it's a traumatizing images. We can't show that to you without really, for, you know, some kind of process so the leadership can come to the conclusion, do we have to show these images? And they are responsible for the most vicious killing I ever seen in my life or for my generation. These 3 guys. Museveni killed 1 million Africans in Uganda. And Kagame was part of the shooting down of the plane that ignited the genocide in Rwanda. 1 million is killed. And in Congo, some 10 million people killed. Kabila was is the president of Congo today. As we're talking, they have death squad almost over the place throughout Congo, killing people just mercilessly. And all these killings have material basis. This is the submission to imperialism. This is to testify the loyalty to imperialism. Keep us in power, we will kill as many as Africans as require. And then you're going to say you're Pan-Africanist? Because the Pan-Africanists are in love with Kagame. Pan-Africanism hates class struggle. They cover class struggle. We don't want to cover up class struggle anymore. So if you want to build the African nation, you got to be prepared to do, as Elikia has shown us, coupe tete. Is that Bulekano? You go prepared to do that. So class struggle is serious. There is no romance about that. So I just want people to be aware of that. So I think I've talked too long already. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. And the discussion is more important. Yes, welcome, mates.
I just want to punctuate what Comrade Luwezi has just said. This discussion of the nation is a discussion based on our determination to name ourselves. Yes. We're naming ourselves. We're no longer Christine. No. We're no longer accepting the names that have been imposed on us by the slave master. No. I don't care what anybody, I don't care what Stalin said. I really don't. I use that as an example to destroy the logic that's associated with this definition that has been imposed on so many people. This is not necessarily an attack on Stalin. Stalin had one mission, we got another one. And in the final analysis, we say, and I think it's really important for us to grapple with the question of science, we say that there are objective and subjective factors that determine this whole question of the nation. We've explained how we've come to the conclusion about national identity, and we've defined the historical mission, the historical basis, the historical necessity that is responsible for the African proletarian leadership to consolidate the African nation. But in the final analysis, we say we are a nation because we feel like we are a nation. We feel, and we are a nation because we say we are a nation. That's how we are a nation. And no other people has to run around the world trying to explain why they are a nation. I don't hear white people doing that, even as white so-called nations are crumbling, disintegrating all around the world, but white people don't have to run around saying why they are a nation. We are a nation because we feel like we are a nation. We are a nation because we say we are a nation. We take control of our own destiny and we define ourselves for ourselves in a fashion that serves our interests. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Man, this mic is hot. I just really want to appreciate Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Secretary Luwezi for a dynamic panel discussion. Let's give them another round of applause. You know, the question of the nation is so important, and that's what really drawn me, because I think that you know that it's something missing, you know, and Chairman says that a people without a theory tend to boil from all these different places, and we all called ourselves all these crazy names. But, you know, this right here is so critical to really understand and raffle with as we, you know, go out into the community. I just really appreciate this panel and just continuing to deepen our understanding of the question of the nation. And we're going to open it up for questions, so you can start lining up. I know you got questions, so come on and stand up and say stuff. You know, I was earlier this year, Chairman and Deputy Chair Onizane Yeshitela and Chimaranga accompanied me to a really crazy meeting around, you know, the question of, you know, Africans and Africans here, and they just could not sum it up, like, at all, you know, and it was really hard. You know, here I am, like, on this panel, like, trying to put out science, you know, on this panel of this craziness. But, you know, when I go out in Ipidam and organizing, the question of, like, we are African, we won, like, this is something that our community is looking for, like, to be able to explain and help them to understand, to connect them to their birthright, because we have been told so many times that we're something else. And it's funny because Brooklyn, she's 7, and, like, this is so, like 2 + 2 = 4, right? Like, I'm African, like, you know, like, she going to school telling her teacher, like, yeah, you know, your grandparents stole us and that's why I'm here. You know what I'm saying? I'm from Africa. Her teacher's like, well, you were born in St. Louis. Brooklyn's like, but I'm from Africa and I was born here because y'all stole me, you know? You know, but she get it at 7, like, it just makes so much sense, but she don't know anything else. This is all she know. So, you know, I just want to really encourage people to ask, you know, questions related to what we're talking about right now. So, line up. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I just want to really appreciate this political education, this piece. I think what other comrades have been saying is, it is crucial, the question of the nation. It is extremely crucial. And I wanted to kind of expand upon the question around, I think it's really something to talk about the question of this whiteness being broken up, and the question of imperialism being in crisis, and how, like you said, with Britain and the Brexit vote, and the problems in Spain and the Catalonian islands, and, you know, Greece with the austerity, and we see that they're losing their grip. Imperialism is in crisis, and that's what we must build upon. We must build upon imperialism being in crisis. Also, standing in solidarity with our other comrades, like with the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, and then pulling away from the IMF. They say the IMF, get out. This is what we build upon. It's saying that the question of the nation is, you claim your identity. You claim it, and you claim your liberation. So I just really wanted to unite with this political education, with this piece, and saying that we should build upon that, the question of the nation as claiming our African identity, claiming our indigenous identity, and uniting in solidarity with those comrades. So that's all I had. Uhuru.
All right, Uhuru. Yeah, this discussion, Masimba, is that Masamba? All right. Yeah, this discussion is solid, you know, and I'll just leave it at that. I wanted to talk about these borders as it relates to this identity question and the question of the nation. and look at this campaign here of Keep 28. For those who may not know, the bourgeoisie here has reduced the number of wards in St. Louis, cut them in half, and received some support from neo-colonial politicians who benefit from the system. And so we've been making this struggle to prevent this reduction of wards, which is essentially these territories, overseen by these neo-colonialists. So I don't really know how to frame the question, but can you kind of talk about the contradiction where, in the short term, we have to struggle for this sort of representation, even to make space for Black power to move into, this arena. But at the same time, we understand that these borders and territories really facilitate our disunity.
Yeah, that's a really important issue. As Comrade T'Chawa just mentioned, we are involved in the struggle here in St. Louis. The population of St. Louis might be 308,000 people. In the 50s and into the 60s, it was close to 1 million people. And when the struggle of African people heated up, the white people, they call it white flight. They got the hell out of Dodge. And that's why you find in St. Louis County some 92 municipalities, because white people went and set up their own little cities. And one of those cities was Ferguson, that used to be majority white. They got their own police, they got their own set up general schools and all of that, so they wouldn't have to deal with Africans and Black power. And that's why the beginning flight that saw a lot of these buildings, you cannot but have seen that much of North St. Louis looked like it's been bombed out. Part of that came as a consequence of that process. And up until they talked about how 47% of the population in St. Louis is African, but that's a lie. It is literally true that unless you wanted to, unless you had to pay a bill or see the police, you could be in North St. Louis and not see a white person. You don't have to see a white person. It's like one of the things about being in Africa where you don't have to see no white people. In St. Louis, North St. Louis, you can be in North and not see a white person. And but it's a dilemma for them too, because there's a lot of territory. So they've established in North St. Louis, not too far from here, they've created a national global, a geospatial rather, a spy center. They're creating that. They took some 90-some odd acres of land occupied by African people, used the power of eminent domain to get them out of there. They've 90-some odd acres of land, one of the most secretive police organizations, spy organizations in the country. It's a national geospatial, whatever the other part of it stands for. And that keeps drones flying over different places. They use it. The war that's in Yemen now, where the U.S. is showing who to kill and where to kill them and stuff, they use entities like the National Geospatial thing with satellites and drones and the whole bit. That's what they're creating here. So it's a lot of terrain here, a lot of territory. And the struggle for them is how to control this territory, how to get the Africans out. And white people are the ones, like I said, who are leaving. But anyway, they came up with a plot in 2012. And where they had what was supposed to be something like a plebiscite, a vote. But only the white people knew that it was on the, what it was, and it was under the radar. They didn't even campaign in the African community around this question. And only a handful of people like Yeshitela, an African, was one of them who really fought against it. And the vote was to reduce the number of wards. There are one alderperson for each ward, to cut it from 28 to 14. in the name of efficiency and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the objective, obviously, was to destroy or undermine the ability and potential for African occupiers of those spaces. Because if you got 28 wards, then it's obviously much less money involved in campaigning, people know each other, et cetera, and getting elected. If you got 14, that means you double that, then that means there's a greater likelihood of people being susceptible to corporate money and rich white people and stuff. Because rich white people and corporations are already involved, but it would be a lot worse under those circumstances. So that's why we're fighting to keep 28. That's one of the struggles that we're involved in. But you know, T'Challa, somebody came up and told me about when we were raising the flag out there, Comrade Penny said that a car full of African workers pulled up and did a thumbs up, and they were saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. We didn't set up a food shop there. We put up a red, black, and green rag up there. They said, thank you, thank you, thank you. When we were out there, a man pulled up in his car, and he took his little child out, and he was showing this little girl the flag. T'Challa, the struggle that the African petty bourgeois politicians, office holders, they want to keep 28 too. But they want to keep 28 because it's a job. It makes them important. The 28, in some ways, is problematic because what we have here is that each of these guys got their own wards, and nobody else is supposed to come into their ward to do anything because they are the chief in this ward. It fractures in some ways even the solidarity of the people. It makes it difficult to create a coherent strategic approach in the interest of black people. Don't have a strategic approach for the interest. It's my little ward. You understand? And I put a bump in the road, you know, and you can see I got a hump there so nobody can speed, right? That's how they serve. That's why the party is so important. Yes. Keep 28 means an entirely different thing for us. They just say keep 28. We say the fight, what is it? Keep 28?
It's a fight for black power.
That's what we're, keep 28?
It's a fight for black power.
It's a fight for black power. That flag represents that to the masses of people here. So it's always going to mean something different from them. And it would mean something different for the other people if it weren't for us. If it weren't for us, that flag wouldn't be there. We put the flag up there. The advanced detachment of the African working class, and the African workers are stepping forward, coming out, taking pictures, wanting to be associated with that flag because of what it means in terms of our common identity. This step from that flag to Africa is really not very long. People say, well, how are you going to be African? You mean you're going back to Africa? As soon as I slay this dragon. As soon as I slay this dragon. Well, how you going to get everybody back to Africa? I guarantee you, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than it was coming here. You understand? It's going to be a hell of a lot easier than it was coming here. But, you know, yeah, they have another interest, but our work informs them of a greater interest, even as we fight for these little pockets right here. We'll make them pockets of the resistance of the African proletariat, of black power, etc. That's the thing. And guess what? If we keep up this fight for black power, next week, next year, we'll see the population shrinks another 100,000, and the only people, you won't see any white people at all. And it's not going to be a problem because we won't even be buying anything from them because we will have established our own economic capacity right here in this community.
Uhuru, comrades, Uhuru. More than anything, the reason why I love this party so much is because of this question. It really breaks down all of the noise that you hear amongst the African nation. So for example, when I tell people about my lineage, my parents are from the islands, I live here, but I'm an African, people are just like, well, Africans aren't the same. And I just think that, I'm just like, y'all don't even know how much the same we are. And I was really struck by what you were saying about tribalism, Luwezi, and really looking at the way that tribalism is just not only manifested in Africa, but tribalism is manifested across the African world. So now we are, and it's represented with the national question. Now I'm a tribe of Jamaica, I'm a tribe of St. Louis, I'm a tribe of Brooklyn, New York, I'm a tribe of these different things, and how the petty bourgeois opportunists, regardless of where they are in the world, use this whole question to break down the unity of African people when all we want to do is be together. And I just think that, you know, this national question busts up all these identities that that African people are drawn to. Somebody's a Hebrew Israelite, somebody is a Nuwapian or a Moorish science person or whatever else, other type of Kemetic identity that really, I think confuses the masses of African people and have us not even prepared to take power. You know, I just appreciate that question. I just wanted to point that out, and if you can expand on that, I just think that would be great. Uhuru.
I was in my 60s when I first went to Africa. You know, Marcus Garvey never went to Africa. Did you know that? He never set his foot on Africa. And when I first went to Africa, I went to what they call South Africa. Comrade Gaida Kambon was with me. Comrade Luwezi, were you with us the first trip to South Africa, weren't you? And when I got there, they killed a sheep. And we were there because that's the African way, to have a feast. Of course, I didn't eat the sheep. It might have been a goat in this instance. But I did have to do something that I would never do under normal circumstances. I had to sniff some snuff, drink homemade African beer, and take a new name, Zwelaki. That was given to me by the grandmother of the African who brought us there. And I'm just mentioning this to you because if Africans go to Africa as Africans, Africans will be treated as Africans. If you go to Africa as a tourist, you will be treated as a tourist. You understand? Because I hear all the time, they don't like us. What the hell are you talking about? You know, and that's our experience with Africa. I have been in Africa. I've spoken to children in high schools. I don't know who was with me on one instance where I spoke and a child stood up and said, "Thank you for letting us love Africa." Remember that? That was in Namibia? In Namibia. You know, that's incredible. And speaking of names, I spoke at a university in Namibia. Used to call it Southwest Africa. And someone asked me my name and Omali, what did it mean? And it is a derivative of a name out of Nigeria, from a particular ethnic, and from Omali. And Omali means something like prodigal child, the child who has returned. And I told this young woman in the audience that, and she says, "Oh, in our language, or some language there, it means you were here." Isn't that the same thing? You were here. And, you know, we just one African people, and I'm afraid you can't get around that. And you have a lot less money than Michael Jackson. And so it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to try to erase that. But that's a job that's done all the time to keep us disunited. It's all the time, work to keep Africans from being able to unite 1,000 different ways. And I've forgotten what the issue or question that was raised, but I just wanted to elaborate on what Comrade Yeshitela just said. We are one people. Comrade Yeshitela, who is it? Your father from Grenada? Yes. Your mother from Jamaica. Comrade. People before they reached Grenada were from Haiti. From Haiti. Comrade Gaida, born in Panama. Her parents or grandparents, born in Jamaica, and what have you. Who? Comrade Alikia, Haiti. Secretary General Ghazi, where? Trinidad. Comrade Columbai's child's father, Ghana. What the hell are you talking? Comrade Luwezi. Comrade Luwezi is speaking his third language. This is his third language. English is his third language. You understand? And, you know, living in England from Congo. But you know what is so significant about our presence here in this country is it shows the future in the sense that Africa, you know, united in a single economy, we lose all that ethnic stuff that stands between us and the kind of unity that we have to have. Nobody, I don't know Comrade Yeshitela as a Grenadian, and she doesn't know herself as that. And what's she gonna be? How are you gonna make? What are you gonna do? You gonna be like Tiger Woods or Kablasian? So yeah, we are one people. We are one people, and we have to recognize and fight for that, and fight against any efforts that's being made to keep us from recognizing that and keep us disuniting.
Yes, I would like just to say briefly regarding the split we see in Brooklyn, what they call, you know, they characterized as gangs, things like that. In London, they have what they call postcode. So basically, it's true. It's the same, basically, thinking with tribalism, in a sense that with gangs or postcode, it's like in the US, is a result already of the defeat of the Black Revolution, because with the revolution, we will send people to go and talk to those forces, bring political education, as Fred Hampton used to do, and also the African petty bourgeoisie is afraid of the masses. The African petty bourgeoisie, they are class conscious. They are afraid of the African working class. And they might be saying like they want to, you know, they want unity, things like that. No, in the real world, you don't believe people in what they say. You believe in what they do, and they have no programs to put an end to the division, fragmentation, to the violence in our community. Zero programs. Just talk about it, you know, but they have no program. So. It benefits, basically, they control over the people, because it keeps the people fragmented, disorganized, so they can show up anytime they want to. They can mobilize them a particular period of time just for election purposes, and that's it. They don't need the people to be mobilized, organized. They don't need that, because they already know when the African working class is politicized, mobilized, in motion, they fight for black power. If they fight for black power, they're going to fight for the working class leadership of their own movement. They're going to fight to be in the party, right? So the African petty bourgeoisie is always aware of it. So that's all I was saying earlier. There's no romance, and don't underestimate the African petty bourgeoisie. They are clear, class-conscious elements. And also, you have all this psychological warfare in our community all the time. Who tells everybody that it's time to kill each other? It's promoted in the media. Yeah. It's promoted in the songs. Yeah. And who controls the distribution for all these songs. So the same way in London, how someone who's 15 years old can, carry a knife or get a gun and go and kill somebody else is being promoted on the TV. Every time there is a killing, they publicize it. They will never publicize this Congress in the bourgeois media. Right. Tell all Africans, people, come to St. Louis, there is a Congress for you. But if there was a shooting between 16 years old, it's all over papers, all over the news. Why? That's what they want people to do. So there is that going on. And also, we are separated from our resources. That's the direct consequences of that. I know Ghana government is on their official website. They pay $21 billion every year to IMF and World Bank and all these parasitic organizations. Can you imagine the Africans in Queens here, in New York or in St. Louis, what they will do if those $21 billion, because it comes to the United States, but it doesn't come to St. Louis, African community, but it comes here in the United States. Apples claims to have $100 billion. Every year they make a profit. Last year they made a profit of $290 billion. And the year before, $218 billion. This money, I know they made it because of the culture in the Congo, workers not being paid and things like that. And this amount of resources don't go to any African working class community anywhere in the world. So I know there is a division, there is a split in our community because we are starved of our own resources. So it makes sense when we say kill the parasitic capitalists, because they are responsible for everything that's happening in our community.
Uhuru. First, I want to recognize the chairman, and then I want to recognize Comrade Ona Zene for this beautiful, beautiful place. The chairman talked about, people that were passing by and a man with his son. While we were out there, a whole school bus of children came down the street, and the bus driver started raising his fist out the window. All the children got up and started raising their fists and just pumping their fists. A whole bus. They was all trying to get out the window. They was trying to crawl out the window. I've never seen anything like that. This is going to be such an impact and thing inside this community. It is mind-boggling. Another thing, Chairman, in terms of the trip to South Africa, Tanzania, when the comrades slaughtered that, was it sheep or some goat? And I don't know if you remember, he said, we have to keep the head, because I have to take the head to the village to let my father know that you have came back home. Every time that I've been to Africa, nobody ever asked me what part of Africa that I was from. They said, you're back home. You came back home. So it's just really that thing about, us not understanding and, not identifying ourselves is something that we find in this hemisphere, because African people just know that we are back home. They know that we were missing. They don't really understand slavery. I find that out, because I was talking to one of the men in Sierra Leone, and when I told him about slavery, his mouth just hung. He was like, no. And when I told him about the amount of Africans in prison, he couldn't believe it. Just like they starve us about Africa, don't tell us anything about Africa. They don't tell them anything about, us, what happened to us here. They don't tell them over there. But Luwezi, I wanted to ask you a question. I've been looking at African movies, and I'm noticing that some of the words, and this is like in West Africa, mostly Nigeria and Ghana, and the words that they use sometimes have a French meaning. And this is not in the cities where most of the, educated Africans are, because they send them to Europe, whatever, and they come back and they all stay in Lagos. And this is in the villages where, for instance, in referring to the discussion going on with two Africans, and one wanted to say, you're speaking to me, and he said, moi, which is French for me, right? And then another word that they use had a kind of a like Spanish root word. And it set me to wonder whether languages, I don't know, because I don't think these people have been to France or they're under the influence because they weren't colonized by France in Nigeria. That's British. Where does that come from? I mean, I've just been wondering about that, you know. Like even when they say, you know, when they talk to somebody they want to say, you know, they say, sabi, which is also Spanish for saber.
Yes, yes, well,
Yeah.
it comes from imperialism. You know, the African petty bourgeoisie is mesmerized by the European bourgeoisie. So not so only they love speaking European languages, I met Africans from Ghana, from Nigeria. I noticed that they like to speak French, some of them. And vice versa. You know, you also have those Africans, petit bourgeoisie, in so-called French-speaking countries, they love speaking English. So they aspire to be like the European bourgeoisie. So they love French language, they love English language. Not only that, they love what they see as culture from Europe. They give the children names like Omega, Alpha, you know, just names like Greek names, stuff like that. You know, the African petty bourgeoisie in power, when they're sick, they never get treated in Europe. They seek treatments always outside. And most African presidents who died don't die in Africa. You can say 99% of them don't die in Africa. They die in Europe. Mugabe used to come to Europe for what, tooth pain. So is Mobutu. The president of Nigeria spent at least 3 months in London to get treatment. All the money is in Europe. The president of Angola, Dos Santos, when his daughter had birthday, everything from Europe, champagne, water, clubs, and everything. So they identified to Europe. So it makes sense that the culture in Africa that African absorbs, not only in the schools, but on the TV, French films, US films, and things like that. So as you know, the African petty bourgeoisie does not believe in Africa. The African petty bourgeoisie doesn't believe it can defeat Africa, or white power can be defeated. And you see all this submission to Europe, and it permeates through African culture. But there is a conflict, of course, because the masses want to be Africans. But the African petty bourgeoisie will not allow them to be Africans. And that's why we see the conflict in the film. They'll do the film, they'll speak parts African languages, but they still have to impose. Why would you impose French in a country that doesn't speak French? It doesn't make sense unless you want to mesmerize the people. So it's basically a submission. To me, it's another evidence that African petty bourgeoisie is submissive, is loyal, is fidel to imperialism. So that's what it needs to go. So we can have our own culture. We can produce music and films in African languages. We can educate ourselves in African languages. We are the only one. We go to schools and where the education takes place in a foreign language. It's English or French or Spanish throughout Africa. There is no university in Africa in African language. It doesn't exist. You have people in the parliament debating serious business, but it's done in European languages, and the mass don't even get that. Only in Africa, things need to happen. So this is the African petty bourgeoisie. That's what it needs to go.
Earlier when we were standing out there during the flag raising ceremony, Chairman, when you were walking by us, I was just looking at you and I was saying, this is the leader of all Africans on earth. Looking at that flag being raised, you know, I don't see a flag raised like that in, you know, by any of these neocolonial presidents, by, you know, Haile Selassie, by any of these Moorish, anybody. You and the African People's Socialist Party have the forethought to unite every African on earth, and I just want to salute you for that, Chairman, and salute you as well, Secretary General of ASI, Luwezi. I've been waiting so long to see you and hear you speak. I go through the Burning Spear looking for your articles, look up videos, because just the way you explain African internationalism, the way you bring this to the people is just, there's nobody else is doing this on earth, on the entire planet. And I just want to thank you, and appreciate y'all for that. I wanted to kind of expose my I don't know what you want to call it, but I came in when I met the Uhuru movement. I was a Rasta. I was a Rastafarian. Part of showing my disunity with that was chopping off my locks, because I didn't want to because I was very deep into the Rastafari movement, and I would consistently, I would say stupid shit like African internationalism is Pan-Africanism with guns. You know what I'm saying? Just like trying to put together, all this stuff, but I'm studying Moorish science, studying the Hebrew Israelites, studying Rastafari, but, I've been studying African internationalism for 15 years. And I don't know, basically, like with the Rasta vibe, you got, Africans in Jamaica that look at Marcus Garvey as a prophet, and then look at Haile Selassie as God. Right? Christ in his kingly character is what Rastas say. One of the struggles that I've had as an African internationalist, dealing with, a lot of my close people that I came up with, and just Africans in general is, as Yeshitela was saying, you got the Nawabian nation, you got the Nation of Islam, you got the Rastafari nation, you got the Moorish nation, you got, we're searching for nationhood. And if anybody knows me, y'all know that I unite and I work my hardest to expand, to share African internationalism and really try to bring that to the masses, but I'm also kind of an asshole. I'm kind of jaded. I talk a lot of shit. And I end up getting into conflicts with a lot of Africans, or just people on earth, period. But a lot of Africans, because, you know what I'm saying? Like, when I start really thinking about this, I get mad, you know what I'm saying? And I don't know what, and I always have to say this to myself, like, there's nothing wrong with me. You know what I'm saying? I'm colonized, that's what's wrong with me. But these thoughts that I have and all this, it's not like there's a problem with me. But I'm asking, how do we, talk to Rastas, talk to Moors, these Hebrew Israelites, that are poor and working class, and that are just trying to grasp onto these idealistic concepts, without demoralizing them.
The original Nation of Islam was organized by a follower of Marcus Garvey. He had been a member of the Garvey movement. And Garvey did so much to raise the question of the African nation, more than any human being before. And it is our task, of course, as 21st century Garveyites, to finish that process. But the original Nation of Islam, despite our recognition of philosophical contradictions and ultimate problems, was distinguishable because it did push forward the idea of the nation, even if it was a religious nation in Islam. But in many ways, it was more than just a religious nation in the sense that they consider all black people as Muslims. And I was struck on one occasion, and they created, I forgot what you call this religious terms, this whole belief system and what have you. When I came out of the US military, I struggled with this whole question of liberation organization, and actually had a meeting at my house with members of the Nation of Islam because of Malcolm X. And they started talking about Islam, and I knew more about Islam than they did. And that scared them about who the hell I was. And then they scared me by being upset about who the hell I was. And plus, I was outnumbered, right? But the thing I want to point out is that it was bold to have an organization of African people at this critical time in our history that would stand up and say, the white man is the devil. The white man is the devil. It was an articulation of a kind of desire for, however it was being termed, of national liberation that they assumed the masses of African people could unite with. And so I thought that was important. And when you look at even people like Haile Selassie, who Garvey criticized, when he got out of Ethiopia, when the Italians came and started bombing and what have you, Garvey criticized Selassie for what he saw as desertion. But Selassie became a symbol, just like in the Bible. One day Ethiopia shall rise, spread its wings and do such and such a thing. It had a really important significance. African people were oppressed as a whole people. Ethiopia was what we identified with Africa as Ethiopia. And Selassie, well, at a time where Africans were relegated to the worst kinds of stuff and couldn't be anything, Selassie, for a lot of people, was symbolic of African nationhood. Although I was quite embarrassed by him, because every time the white people would have a thing of significance, going to Disneyland or something, they put Selassie in the front of the parade and this kind of silliness and what have you. But, you know, the emperor and all of this at a time where Africans were relegated to cotton patches and what have you. So he was important to a lot of people. And, you know, even the Moorish science, are they considered a nation? But all these expressions of nation, 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 Moorish, this was recognition of sorts of the fact that we have to have our own nation. But one of the things that distinguishes us, and I should comment, Luwezi, you were with me, weren't you with me? You were with me in Kenya. When we went to Kenya, and it's a vicious petty bourgeoisie there, and they sent agents into the meeting. We were quite shocked because we couldn't put out propaganda seriously saying the meeting was going to happen, and the masses turned up at the meeting. And I was speaking, and these agents, what I had done is because I had noticed the rosters who had come to. And in the middle of my presentation, I thought the bourgeoisie had poisoned me when I first got there, but it was Miss Green's sweet potato pie. But in the middle of my presentation, you know, I raised a fist and went, "Jah!" And all the Rastas went, "Rastafari!" You know. So when the agents started acting funny in the audience, the Rastas, with their staffs, their sticks, they surrounded these guys and escorted their asses out of the building. You understand? Because we are materialists. We are historical materialists. And that's the thing that informs us and tells us something about what the future should look like and how we got to be where we are today. you have philosophical idealists who come to conclusions based on other kinds of things. And try as they may, they won't come to the best conclusions, but sometimes, for the moment, they're the best conclusions that the masses can come forward with. So what I say is that you don't have to attack them at all. Nope. In fact, generally speaking, I think you can find an element of unity with them. There are some people who list in organizations in the political report that I didn't get a chance to talk about. There are groups, other groups. There are people who talk about the Black Belt South and the 5 states and stuff like that. Do we characterize as neo-Zionists in a certain way? Because what it means is they're claiming somebody else's land, and people who have been victimized even today as a consequence of having lost their land to imperialism. Now I end up in the same camp talking about this is my land too, so that gives them another thing that they have to contend with. And so they don't like what I say, and they get upset about this definition. But what we've also recognized is that they are nationalists. And our struggle is for national liberation. And I'm going to say what I have to say because I am a materialist. I lead a revolutionary organization. We have to make revolution, and the members of our party have to be absolutely clear. Philosophically, we have to be absolutely clear. But that doesn't mean that we can't unite with folk who are part of the oppressed nation, even sometimes when we consider them backwards. I've used the analogy of a rocket that you see them using to push, that they used to go out of space. And they take the rocket and they put what they call boosters around the rocket because it can't leave the Earth's atmosphere by itself. And so these booster rockets help to thrust it past the atmosphere, and then they fall off. A rocket can go where it needs to go. I see ourselves as that rocket. And sometimes in the struggle for national liberation, because the thing is the nation must be liberated, some of these forces we will be able to see as boosters. You understand? You don't say, let's not get to where we have to go because we have to use boosters. You say, how the hell do we get to where we have to go? In some instances, some of the 5 states, Black Belt, Southers, etc., they will function as boosters in the struggle for national liberation. Our job is to unite the nation in the struggle for national liberation, but to unite the nation under the leadership of the African working class. That's what our task is. That's a poor, I think it's a poor example of what I'm talking about. I hope I was at least relatively clear. This sister here has quite patiently and non-violently told me that my time is up. So I'm going to move out of the way and turn it back over to the leadership of this session. Order.
One Africa. One nation. One nation. One Africa. Izwele too. E-Africa. E-Africa. Izwele too. Uhuru. Let's really give another round of applause of this dynamic. This is a conversation you can't get anywhere else. Nowhere else. These jewels that just was dropped on us to really help shape and help us to really take this out to the masses of people. I just really appreciate this conversation because it's much needed, and literally like this help you be able, I mean, when we have conversations about the nation in this community and talking with people, I have had this lady say, oh my God, I got goosebumps. Because I can see the future. She see a future that she couldn't see one when you explain and help her understand that she's African and Africa is our home. So that conversation is one that we all have to be armed and ready to have. And like Chairman said, we don't have to fight, you know, any of these people. We don't, really don't. It speaks for itself. They might want to fight you, but you don't have to fight them. But Chairman, I mean, I appreciate Chairman, and Chairman is so diplomatic in any kind of situation. No matter what the room is filled with, like I want to just like spit on them, like, you know, just jump up and just snatch my, you stupid, you know. And Chairman say you stupid, but he said it in a way that they be like, I unite. I unite with that. It's real winning. It's real winning. And I tell you, I have really tried to embody that, like really take that on. And, you know, it take, you know, to discipline yourself. And I understand why he had that pad of paper writing, you know, down what they saying, because sometimes you just feel with rage inside. But that pad, you know, he writing down what they say and then how he gonna eat it up, and then he come and he look at it and then he come right down and slice real good, and they be like, oh, thank you for cutting me. Okay, so we're gonna move it along. So let's give it a round of applause for the panel again. So next,
I want, Luwezi Kinshasa isn't here, and most of us are seldom, if ever, where he is. He's not just in England, he's throughout Europe, he's in Africa carrying out this work. I want to make it explicitly clear that the future, Luwezi represents the future of the African People's Socialist Party. I want to be clear on that question. And you have heard him and you see what he brings to this party, to this revolution. He is unassuming comrade. He is self-sacrificing. He has done anything that's possible to do to forward the revolution. He has traveled. I used to travel with Luwezi before he had papers in Europe. This comrade would take me to Paris. We'd get to Paris and get off the train. And this was before they had a situation where you didn't have to have visas to go around Europe. We get off the train and we're going someplace in Paris, and the agents are waiting there, and they would stop Luwezi. And he didn't have papers on him, so they make him get back on the train to go back to London. I don't know where the hell I'm going, right? So I go and sit down and wait. Luwezi gets back on the train, goes to London, leaves from London on another train, goes to Brussels, catch the train from Brussels back in to Paris, and that's how he hooks it up. This comrade is incredible, and he just does incredible work, and he is a genius.
Yes, he
is.
Yes, he is.
And he is made extraordinarily uncomfortable by what I'm saying about him.
Yes.
But I just want to say, this is the future of our party. I want to be clear about it. If somebody says something next week, next year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, I want people to remember the 7th Congress. This is our party's future.
So next on the program, we are going to have another A selection from the Freedom Mass Choir. Yes. They coming. They said I'm gonna grab a tambourine. I might have to do a 2-step. So let's bring the choir back. Uhuru.
I'm from Coach.
Thank you.
Pass the mic. Uhura. Testing. 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 Okay. Uhuru. So this is our last song for the Congress. This has been a great, yeah, for the Congress. It's been a very interesting experience. This has been our debut as a choir. And we definitely, you know, post-Congress, will continue to sharpen our skills, build our membership, and just take these freedom songs everywhere we are. So this next song, we're gonna, I actually didn't write this song, I just put it in a formatted version. It's a bunch of songs that were already written that I've heard as a result of being in the party, and we just put them together to present what we're calling the Uhuru Medley. So this is another song that is a sing-along song. Everybody's gonna have to stand up and sing. And yeah.
You wanna go down? You wanna come down?
Wherever you want to be.
All right. Y'all ready? All right, here we go.
last song in the medley. We shall not be moved. We shall not, just like a tree planted by the water. We shall not be moved. One more time, everybody. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not, just like a tree planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom. We shall not be moved. Fighting for our freedom. Just like a tree. Just like a tree planted. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for Uhuru. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for Uhuru. We shall not. We're fighting for Uhuru. We're fighting for Uhuru. Just like a tree. Just like a tree planted by. We shall not be moved. We shall not be
water. We should not be moved. Uhuru. So next, we are going outside to let the flag down. Is that right? Yes, we are on our way outside. So are we getting some instructions from the... Yes, Uhuru, so I can find out.
Uhuru comrades. So on yesterday we had, revolution is a science. And we had said that we were, had a goal to raise $75,000. And I think on yesterday we had raised $84,000. And today we have a new total of $94,308. So I just want to thank some of the donors that came in today. Joe Frenchy, $40. Ed Bailey, $30. No, $300. Ruby Gillison, $5,000. Is that right? Uhuru, yes, $5,000. Augusta Remain, child please, $100. Connor Voss, $100. And Kenyatta Cosby, $1,200. David DeCasa, $25. And we want to say for those who pledge, We still need for you to go in the back and fill out, complete your pledge by getting online, setting your pledge up online. So we really want to thank everybody. I want to say before the end of the Congress on Friday, we want to be at $100,000. You think we can make that happen? Yes. So keep those donations coming. And if you feel like you want to change your donation, please feel free to do so. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. Izwele too. E-Africa. E-Africa. Izwele too. Okay, I want to appreciate everybody, the chairman, leadership, Secretary General Luwezi, for going over everything that you went over today, your presentation. Thank everybody for giving the money, the donations, and everything. So right now we're gonna have the flag. We're gonna lower the flag. So we're gonna ask all the NC members to leave. They're gonna leave out once the honor guard comes in. Once they come in, and then we're gonna have all the Africans going to follow the honor guard, and then the solidarity. Solidarity is going to line up on the wall like we did this morning, and the Africans will be lining up across the street just like we did this morning. Okay? Everybody clear? Yes. Okay, thank you. Let me make sure the honor guard's ready. Hold on. Are we filing out the same way? Same way, yes.
Through the 12th. Registration is open now at apspuhuru.org/Congress. Party members from all over the world will present reports, including Deputy Chair Onizine Yeshitela, Director of Agitation and Propaganda Akile Anai, Secretary General Gazi Koto, and of course, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Register now at apspuhuru.org/Congress. That's apspuhuru.org/CONGRESS.
Uhuru, we're doing incredible work here. And the state is on this job. And so I just wanted to let everybody know of a situation that we just had outside. Like Chairman has been talking, and this is so dynamic, and we could not let the state do what they do because we understand who they are, and they come in many forms. And there's a lot of money that has been dumped into St. Louis, and our presence here threatened the petty bourgeoisie. And the petty bourgeoisie and the aspirations of the petty bourgeoisie, because sometimes the working class have the aspirations and be bought by these petty bourgeoisie. And so we had some protester, not protesters, a protester to show up, and he was asked, he had to be wanted to come in. And he said, do you know who I am? Like y'all wasn't here, and your people got to do better than that. Y'all wasn't here when we were fighting, and all these things like the revolution started in Ferguson. It's just craziness for me to even try to explain the foolishness that just came out of a foolish person's mouth. But I just wanted to alarm us as we go out that we are not going to get distracted on what we're here for. And so we have our own agenda, and we're going to continue to work our agenda by any means necessary. And so we're going to go on with y'all. It's going to lead.
I have a couple more announcements. Okay, so when we line up, if anybody have cameras, can you not get in line with the rest of everybody else filing out? If you want to take pictures, just make yourself a little bit, stand off to the side so you can get your pictures. We don't want anyone standing in line taking pictures at this time. Another thing, let's see, so, what else?
Papa's got pictures, no one else can take pictures.
Yeah, no one. Okay, no one, all right, our Agipop is on top of taking all the pictures, and no one else is not approved to take pictures, please. So the honor guard, can y'all come down? Can y'all assemble, please? Oh yeah, one other thing. Can you, all right, can you not take your bags? Can you leave everything here? You're not gonna steal from each other, so they'll be safe. Okay, I want to reiterate, if the protesters outside, we just, pay them no attention, and we're going to stay calm, and we'll, we have our security out there. We're going to go through our program, and everything's going to be good. Okay? Everybody, with that, uhuru? Okay, will all the Africans, the